anyone with a weapon?
No. A hidden camera recorded the test from start to finish when Darren Routier denied knowing who murdered his two sons or stabbed his wife.
No.
The examiner called him a liar.
In the short run, you have to live with the knowledge that you may have gotten away with murder. But in the long run, it'll catch up with you.
It all started in upscale Rowlett neighborhood 2 years ago. Two young boys were stabbed to death. Their mother, wounded herself, blamed a late-night intruder.
They just stabbed me in my cabin.
Police later accused her of staging the entire thing. And a jury, which watched these pictures of the family grieving with silly string at the boy's gravesite, sentenced her to death. Routier's family asked wealthy Waco insurance executive Brian Pardo to help get her off death row, and he started his own investigation.
Darlie did not commit this crime.
Pardo is perhaps an unlikely amateur detective. He's a Vietnam vet who built a multi-million-dollar Waco insurance company, Life Partners. Pardo says he's a conservative Republican who believes in the death penalty. But in another high-profile case, he defended the man later executed for the murders of 3 people at Lake Waco in 1982. Convinced of Darlie's innocence, he turned his attention to who did it.
I frankly did not think that Darren would fail the test. I felt like Darren would pass the test.
Darren repeated what he said all along, that he was upstairs sleeping during the attack.
What I know is that polygraph is wrong.
What you know is you came here, sat down, and told me a bunch of lies.
I don't have to convince you, because I know that I had nothing to do with it whatsoever in any way, shape, or form.
But now, the man Darren Routier asked to investigate has big doubts, not about Darlie's innocence, but his own. In Waco, Scott Gordon, NBC5.
It's Sully, Jones, and Johnson, and this is Kitchen Table Research, where we do the research so you don't have to. If you want to go look at our library of evidentiary photos, you can find those on our social media pages. We've posted most photos from Darlie, but I do feel like there's a few that are important to this specific episode, so I will go back and probably repost those, me or Johnson will. If you have not listened to the Darlie series, you need to go back and listen to our first 7 episodes. If you rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite platform, send us a screenshot to kitchen.table.research@gmail.com and we will send you a bumper sticker. Our social media is kitchen.table.research podcast on Instagram and Kitchen Table Research Podcast on Facebook. Like I said, our Gmail is kitchen.table.research@gmail.com, and you can find our link to our very well done website through any of our social media bios. Okay? So I want to let you guys know, I acquired from a butcher bovine hearts and about 4 or 5 liters of blood and try to do some of the recreations that we talk about with Bevel. So on my TikTok page recently, I've been talking a lot about Bevel and talking about BPA or blood pattern analysis as a science, or as we now kind of refer to it as a junk science. And so I was kind of demonstrating this to show I can easily poke holes and show multiple other ways that blood could have gotten on Darlie's shirt and the fashion that it did. So if you guys are interested in that, unfortunately, my first TikTok got taken down. So I'm new to TikTok and I maybe was not as informed about trigger warnings. I've now done my research. I know how to do correct trigger warnings, but also I was getting a lot of harassments in the comment section. So there's a strong hate group that follows Darlie, unfortunately, and they are quite opinionated and honestly can be quite vile and vicious. So if you want to join the TikTok, I would just say stay out of that. If anybody, either report it or just block them. My new TikTok is now at Marcus the Bunny. So MarcusTheBunny. BUNNY. Or you might see my comments pop up as Take It Sleazy. This is an old account of mine. So go ahead and join the discussion. While you're there, go ahead and follow Danelle, who is Darlie's sister, who has now become outspoken about the case and is giving inside information about what she knows on this case. And her name is Danelle, and you can find her TikTok at Fugate1982 or FUGATE1982. I think we've got some new subscribers. Johnson, why don't you go ahead and tell us about our subscribers and then go ahead and get into a few corrections from past episodes.
Yeah, so we want to give a shout out to our new subscribers. We've got Born Texas 72, Davis 0805, and Barbado at Yoo-Hoo. Thank you guys so much for subscribing. We're going to be getting some more content out to you soon, and thank you for the support.
And a couple of people on TikTok that have been super supportive. She is Canadian, and her name is Balooby, Balloobie is her username. And we've gotten a lot of information from her and another Darlie supporter on TikTok named Mystery Maverick. So thank you guys for helping us consult on this case. Also, I'd like to give a special shout out to the PI who's worked on this case, Rich Prater. He has talked to me, and I might be appearing on his YouTube this Sunday. So when this gets released, you guys can go watch his podcast. And if you're interested in seeing us speak on there or them speak on our podcast, they might jump over here at some point as well. So do you want to go ahead and make those corrections before we jump in?
Yeah, so we've got a few. First off, in our polygraph episode, I wasn't super clear about probation versus parole for sex offenders. So polygraphs were and maybe still are used to determine, it's just another tool in the arsenal when sex offenders are on probation. It is not used to determine if they get parole or not.
So it's not like a determination of whether they get out. It's more like keeping them on track once they are released back into society.
Correct.
Okay.
It's like another tool they use when they do their like
checkups and UAs and stuff. Okay.
Yeah. Also, in one of the former Darlie episodes, I was talking about a serial killer and I called him Ed Kemper. I was actually referring to Jerry Brudos. It's my bad. I always get them mixed up for some reason.
Yeah, Jerry Brudos was the foot fetish guy, and Ed Kemper is Bumblebutt.
Yes, Bumblebutt the co-ed killer.
Yeah, big old Bumblebutt.
I always get them confused, I think, because they both cross-dressed occasionally.
Yeah.
But I meant Jerry Brudos. We also have some name corrections from Darlie's family that we have gotten mixed up. We let you know in the first episode, there's a lot of names and we're going to mix them up, and here it is. So, first of all, we talked a lot about Denny Key. He does not exist. We got a couple names mixed up together. Basically, Darlie's biological father is Larry Peck, and he's the one in Pennsylvania. And then Mama Darlie married Dennis Stahl, so Darlie's first stepfather, and they had Danelle and Dana together. And then Mama D married Bobby Key, and they were married at the time of the crime. This is Darlie's second stepfather. So when we talk about Denny Key, we actually mean Bobby Key.
Yeah, I think his name was Robert.
Yeah. All right, so let's jump into the episode, part 8, guys.
Woohoo! Can you believe we put out like 10 hours of Darlie content?
I'm surprised we got it down to that little, honestly.
And we're not done. The next thing we're going to do is go over the DNA report that's become very important in Darlie's appeal process. And Jones is getting the information together as we speak. She's actually physically with me, and so we are working on that this week. So of course, with the holidays, we posted a couple of other fillers while we continue to do research on Darlie.
Yeah, but today we are going to talk about some more theories and conspiracies that have come up surrounding the case. Our last 2 episodes were on alternative suspects, and there theories and conspiracies kind of mixed into that, but this is more of an extenuation into the case in general. So, as we delve into the complex labyrinth of Darlie Routier's case, various theories emerge and lingering questions cast shadows over the accepted narrative. The uncomfortable truth forces us to question whether both the prosecutors and the defense were influenced by bias, indifference, or incompetence. Let's talk about it. The first theory we're going to delve into, Jones will give to us, and we got this out of Kathy Cruz's book, but the theory's progenitor is Lloyd Harrell. Jones, do you want to take over?
Well, she had to step away for 1 second, so I'm going to read for her, and then when she gets back, she'll jump in. So Lloyd Harrell, he is an ex-FBI investigator, and he paints a vivid picture of an intruder entering through the garage window. A chilling tale of sedation, assault, and murder. But does it align with the forensic evidence? This case often keeps Lloyd Harrell, an ex-FBI investigator, awake at night, and has for the past 27 years, as Darlie has spent 27 years on death row. Lloyd was hired by the original defense team of Parks and Huff, who had also hired Labor and Epstein. You guys know we've talked about them. When Doug Mulder, her second attorney, took over the case, he continued to retain Harrell as his investigator, but did not use any other investigative information that had been gathered by Labor and Epstein, nor Parks and Huff. So Kathy Cruz, who wrote 2 books about Darlie and ultimately changed her viewpoint from guilty to not guilty, listens to Harrell's theories and conclusions because Harrell also believes in Darlie's innocence and has from day one. And now I'm going to let Jones take it away.
So Lloyd Harrell has a theory which it evolved over time. So it wasn't his immediate theory because it's so hard to put a timeline together. His hit theory is the intruder entered the house through the open window in the garage. The intruder walks through the door into the utility room because Darren did not lock it. And this is what the court reporter read back to the jury incorrectly. The intruder's motive was to sexually assault and kill Darlie. And we're going to get into that motive as time goes on. The intruder has no expectation that anyone else is going to be in the room except for Darlie. He picked up a sock from the folded clean rag pile in the utility room. He doused it in a quick-acting sedative like ether, chloroform, or either styrene xylene, and those are easily made with common household products. They also have a very short half-life, which means, maybe they work for 15 minutes and then they leave the body. Anesthetics make a person very sleepy and they erase short-term memories. The intruder places the drug-soaked sock over Darlie's mouth and she is immediately sedated and incapacitated. He stabs her and then he looks up and realizes that there are 2 young boys on the floor. He stabs Devon to death, and then he does the same stabbing to Damon. It takes Damon a little bit longer to die. The intruder turns his attention back to Darlie. She rouses somewhat to fend him off. That's when the bruises occur on Darlie's arms because he had to be positioned such that he was kind of sitting on her lower half and had that right arm under his control. He backs off the couch and Darlie's body, and he turns to leave to go out the garage through the utility room. Back through the open window, he's still got the sock. And he believes that he's left Darlie for dead. Of course, that's not the way that happened. The intruder goes down the alley. He drops the sock 150 yards down the alley, and the police find that sock about 3 hours later that morning. The sock has a drop each of Devon's blood and Damon's blood. It does not have any of Darlie's blood. And as DNA evolves, it also reveals some of Darlie's cells from her mouth area. That's the epithelial cells. No one can reconstruct this crime scene where Darlie has enough time to plant that sock evidence come back into the house, scream for Darren, and talk to EMS, all without leaving her own blood evidence on the sock and dripping blood from her neck wound back into the house from where the sock was deposited.
So, in my demonstrations, when Darlie says that she felt pelvic pain, you guys probably know, I've talked about it. My husband and me try to reconstruct the attack, and then I had my dad come in and do it and see what he would do differently. Well, he did something as I was laying on the couch, and I have a video of this that I can post. He uses his body weight to push me into the backing of the couch, again, to gain control over me. And because Darlie was laying on her left side, as we know, because blood ran down the left side of her t-shirt, my dad put his weight up against my hip, basically to where I couldn't move. And the first thing I thought was, oh my gosh, that hurts my hip, which Darlie complained of pelvic pain. So if you guys would like me to post that, I certainly can. I'll probably go ahead and post it to my TikTok under Marcus the Bunny. So speaking of intruders, go ahead and get us into Waddell.
So Waddell states, as he drives up, because he is the first policeman on the scene, he did not call in to the EMS or his office, the police office, and say, I'm on my way to that 5801 Eagle Drive address. He simply is parked in a church parking lot about a mile away from the house, and he just thinks, oh, I'll just drive over there and see what's going on. So as he drives up, his headlights are aiming towards the fountain that is in their front yard, and he thinks he sees somebody standing outside by the fountain. He redacts that statement as the story evolves. And then he says it was only Darren. It was only Darren. And then Darren turns around and leads Waddell back into the house. Now that's a little bit hard to understand because you hear Darren on the 911 tape while Darlie's talking to EMS. So either Darren's outside the house or he's inside the house, but he can't be both. It's very difficult to interpret that EMS call as to where Darren actually was. Yeah. Another possibility is off the foyer, there are two rooms. One's a dining room, one's a formal living room. The perp could be standing, especially if there are two perps, in one of those dark rooms off the foyer. He goes out the front door as Waddell arrives, and then he is standing in front of the fountain. That's what Waddell sees. As Waddell gets out of the car and starts to approach the house, this perp leaves around the side of the house. He's the one that drops the sock. And so that's another, perhaps, way this could have happened. They brought out the canine dogs at about 5-ish, and the dogs track the scent that they have. I wonder what they gave them to track the scent by. Boys' clothes? Interesting. The dog loses the scent at the sock, and subsequently a police officer finds that sock about 5:30, 150 yards from the back of the home. So is there something that happened when Waddell was first on the scene? Did he really see the perp before he announced his presence? Neither Darlie or Darren remember either 911 or Waddell announcing that he was a police officer. He just comes across the scene, and Darren leads him into the house. I mean, I assume the assumption has to be that Darlie and Darren knew there was a police officer there. I don't think they thought it was the perp coming back in the house. Waddell can't really do much because he has to wait for a second police officer in order to clear the house before they can begin any kind of investigation.
Or any type of life-saving measures like EMTs.
Right. And the EMTs were not there yet. Waddell was first on the scene. Darren had to have gone out the front door in only his jeans. We think he was barefoot, and we think he was bare-chested because his neighbor Gorsuch, P.O., Waddell, and Darren all testify to that. That confuses people because we hear Darren all throughout the 911 call, which we reenacted in our first episode.
So there has been some talk about Darren's DNA being on the sock or not. The next episode that we're going to do, we're going through all the DNA through the 2015 appeal where they retested a bunch of stuff. And my mother, who's a extremely smart nurse practitioner, although she's not a DNA expert, has spent a lot of time and research breaking that down for us.
And that's going to be in the next episode.
There's also I want to say conspiracy out there that the state cut off the first part of the 911 call and that you can hear Darren talking in that call. But again, Waddell states that he sees somebody leave through the front door. Now, is this just a chaotic scene and people are coming and going? Absolutely. I cannot verify that there is a tape out there that exists where the first part of the conversation is cut off. The man seen at the fountain, the black car sightings leading up to the crime, echoes of unanswered questions. Did investigators really explore these leads thoroughly, or did they let things fall through the cracks? It is confusing that between pre-trial testimony and trial testimony that a lot of stories have changed, including the nurse's notes and, as we state, Waddell's testimony. The next thing I want to talk about is Cron showing up about 5:30 or 6. He shows up right around the same time that they find the sock. And Cron goes in, and we've already said he makes a 20-minute assessment of what he believes happened. So let's go through that because he makes some assumptions that end up not being true. And some of these assumptions are what Darlie was actually arrested on. Let's get into it. So he also starts his investigation before either of the Routiers have placed a statement or told any of the officers anything because Darlie's in surgery. First of all, we know the blonde hair that comes back to a female police officer, and I think her name is Sarah Jones. It's in the DNA report, so we'll get into that in the next episode. Cron originally assumed that Darlie was facing the TV, and because little to no blood was found on that side of the couch, and blood was found on the side. So originally he thinks Darlie is facing the TV, and because little to no blood was found on that side of the couch, and blood was clearly evident at the sink where Darlie is seen walking to and from with her bloody footprints going in both directions, he assumed she slit her throat at the sink. But in my demonstration, I can show you what my sink looked like after wringing out bloody towels and carrying them back and forth. In crime scene photos, and this is one that I want to post in particular, you can see her pillow and blood on the green leather sofa where her head was actually laying. Because remember, she was not laying facing the TV, she was laying facing away from it to get some sleep. So, how did the family deal with the tragedy of the two boys being ripped from their life? And how does this affect someone coming from your opinion, Joan? So, a lot of people have talked about Darlie having amnesia, not only from a major trauma, but possibly a drugging, and because she goes straight into surgery and is then giving anesthesia, that can also act as a short-term, that can also produce short-term memory loss. And I just want to state that the styrene-xylene chemical that we've heard tossed around is used in construction. So I just kind of want you to keep that in the back of your mind. So dissociative amnesia could be a reason for Darlie's fragmented memory or, like I stated, the styrene sock and several other factors. Certainly, psychiatric medications were also in play, altering perceptions. Was the courtroom too quick to judge her actions when she could have been under the influence of trauma, dissociative amnesia, and medication? I'm going to let Jones go ahead and talk about the dissociative amnesia. And she's going to give you kind of her medical opinion on this.
So short acting anesthetics are used throughout a surgical suite. And so anybody that's recently been in surgery, you usually get a gulp of Versed, which relaxes you, makes you a little silly. You say some stupid things. That's when you count back, 9, 8, and then you're asleep. So we know she was in surgery. They probably gave her some of that medication as they started the procedure. And so that's certainly a reason for Darlie to not remember a whole lot. As she came out of surgery, they also gave her, I believe, some Ativan. And Ativan also does the same thing.
And some kind of pain medication.
I think
Tramadol?
I think she may have gotten some tramadol. We're trying to get a hold of those records. And both of those in combination, she was probably pretty zoned out. Well, James Patterson arrives at the hospital at 6:30 a.m., about the same time that Darlie comes out of surgery, around the same time that Darren is in a waiting room with Terry Neal and decides he's going to question. So I think the first thing he does is go into the room where Darren is waiting. He kicks Terry Neal out. He tells Darren he's got to strip, put those clothes in a bag, and they give him a set of hospital scrubs to wear. Then he goes into Darlie's room. She's pretty out of it, and he tries to question her. She doesn't tell exactly the same story that she did when Waddell first walked into the house, but it is close, and she's trying to fill in gaps for herself. And so that first morning is still chaos. Now remember, James Cron and James Patterson, so investigator and chief detective on the case, have not talked. So Jimmy Patterson does not know Cron's theory about Darlie did it. And so he's still probing to see if Darlie can come up with any memories, any description of the perp, all of that kind of stuff. So it's not until later on in the day that they all get together and everybody presents their theory, and everybody loves Cron's theory because it solves the case quickly and easily. Darlie and Mama Darlie start on some medications. Multiple high-dose psych meds. One of them, I think, is Paxil. It's like a Prozac or an SSRI. Now, I do not know how big a dose that was. Darlie was unable to contribute much because she was on high-dose medications. She was in acute grief. And Sully likes this quote because they describe this dissociative amnesia as a snow globe getting shaken up, and that snow's falling all over, and you can't see what the bottom of the snow globe looks like. And so she is just kind of out of it, peering into the snow globe. Interesting. Okay. One of the other questions that's frequently asked of me is, why did they not transfuse her if she lost so much blood? And I'm going to tell you that the markers for your hemoglobin, which is the red blood carrying capability, red blood cell capability in your body, it was not low enough. You typically don't get transfused until you're as low as 6 and 7. We know that Darlie was 9 that afternoon because they pulled her lab work after she was out of surgery about 4 o'clock that afternoon. So we also know that a couple of months before the crime, she had been to the doctor. They had done her lab work. Her hemoglobin was sitting at 12.9, almost over the top on normal. So it drops, when you do the calculations on that, it drops about 20%. And so, could she have been woozy and doozy as she got put into the ambulance? Absolutely. And also remember, she was immediately taken to surgery because she's spurting blood. So there's some more blood loss in the ambulance and in the ER until they get her back to the OR and are able to staunch that blood. Had Darlie not received quick and timely medical attention and were able to stop her bleeding neck and arm, she very well could have bled out. Now, the Routiers are kind of medically naive about trauma and all this stuff. And of course, I am sure in a state of shock. Darlie Key, Mama Darlie, they're all the same person, arrived at the hospital sometime mid-morning, and the understanding is that Darren had called her on his way to the hospital and said, Darlie's been attacked, she's in surgery, the boys are dead. I think she knew that before she got to the hospital. Damon was already at the hospital in the medical examiner's office. Devin was left dead on the carpet at the Routier home until they took him away somewhere around 5:30 to 6. There's also questions about the bruises on her arm, and you can watch them develop in some of the crime scene, and it's really the afterward of her being in the hospital. People think that they are IVs. They are not IVs. You don't get that kind of deep blue trauma on your upper arm from somebody trying to start an IV. Your IVs are typically wound up the arm. They start in the hand. If they don't get it there, they'll try one through the wrist. And then if all else fails, you're going to go right to the antecubical where the elbow is. And so trying to start an IV in your upper arm would be really strange. It's just not the way it works.
Well, and everybody that went to visit Darlie said that it was in only one arm in her hand, I believe.
No, I thought the bruises were up on her.
No, I mean the IV was in her hand.
Oh, okay.
And she was also IV'd on only one side. So she has bruises on both sides.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Interesting. One of the other questions I've had is if they had given her fluids, which they would have because she was low in her blood and they were trying to pump up the volume, would that have changed her hematocrit reading? No. The hemoglobin reading, the answer is no. That would not. I guess the question is, would it have thinned the blood out enough to change the reading? And that's not the way that works. So the answer is no. Okay, I'm going to switch back to Sully and see what she has.
So, of course, a lot of people on TikTok and other forums say that Darlie was not really that hurt. And when we originally looked at the medical records, we stated that she had lost 40% of her blood, which would have definitely required a transfusion. We were a little wrong on our calculations, so I want to make a quick correction. She lost about 20% of her blood. We've looked at the numbers, ran them again. She lost about 20% of her blood. So if you think when you go donate blood, you give about 8% of your blood volume during donation. And some people get woozy and dizzy just from donating blood. And it depends on, your nutrients, your hydration, your weight, sex, age, all those things can influence when you donate blood, what kind of side effects that you could have. So Darlie lost, over double that. So if you've ever given blood, maybe you can kind of compare that. Now, I want to have a quick discussion just between KTR because I do have a story of amnesia. And I just want to discuss, let's start with you, Johnson. Do you have any stories that you want to discuss? Have you ever had dissociative amnesia?
Not dissociative amnesia per se, but definitely during some of the traumatic events in my life, I don't have complete memories. Like, I know what happened, but they're out of order. Some of the important parts are missing, and I only remember like weird details that aren't really super relevant. So
you can kind of relate to some of that.
Yeah, the snow globe thing definitely makes sense because it's like you have this feeling of removal and like you're watching it happen to someone else, and it's very like disjointed. It's very odd.
Well, and it's obviously a way for the brain to protect you from trauma. So, Jones does have a quick story about hers, and then I will give my story. So,
Mine is funny in some ways and funny not in other ways. I am older than my sister by 4 years. She was born, and I do not have any memories of my sister until we're about 7 or 8 years old. Now, I don't know if that meant that when my mom had my sister, I didn't like her or exactly how that all worked, but I truly do not remember her until we were in elementary school and she was probably still in kindergarten. I don't know what that means, but that's my story. Sully wants me to talk a little bit about where we lived. My dad was a geologist. He was part of the exploration of the Amazon basin down in South America, and we lived in Venezuela for 8 years from the time I was a baby until we came back to the United States. And I was in third grade when that happened. You know, I suppose there are several traumatic things that happened in Venezuela. I don't count them as traumatic. They didn't tear my life apart by any means. We had a woman that lived with us. She cooked and she cleaned for us. She babysat for us. One night, my parents are out, and somebody knocks on our front door. He's got a gun pointed at her and says, "I want in." And she says no and slams the door on him. And then he walks around to the side of the house, knocks on the door, and I can't remember whether she opened the door or didn't open the door, but, said, "Get out of here. I'm calling the police." So that happened. Was that traumatic? I'm sure it was at the time. I remember my mom and dad finally getting home. We were all awake. We were all talking about it, that kind of stuff. I used to be able to lay in my mom and dad's bed when we had the chicken pox, and the Venezuelans would come across our cinder block fence, and the boys would scoop down on the clothesline and steal all the clothes off the clothesline. And I would be in my mom and dad's bed and watching them. And so, again, kind of nothing big. It didn't affect the rest of my life, but I think, somehow,
maybe it affected your memory.
Maybe it did, and maybe my memories are completely wrong because I fashioned them according to what I remember, not actual, and what people said to me. And for years and years, I jumped out of the bed late at night because there was a story that a young woman in our oil camp had been attacked by a man hiding under her bed and grabbing her legs as she got out of bed. Now, that one was kind of traumatic. And you know what? I'm 70 years old. Let's face it. I still do the same thing. I will not put my feet on the ground without doing a little maneuver outside the bed.
Did you know all that about your, what would she be? Your
Host?
Mother-in-law is Did you know she lived in Venezuela and everything?
No, I did not. That's crazy. What a shout out to your
The nanny.
Yeah, the nanny, because what a badass to just
she
be
was
like,
a
"Oh, someone's
badass.
gonna break in. Get out of here, you idiot!"
And she
I love
had
that.
her own gun.
Oh, of course.
Yeah,
She's
so
amazing.
she was packing. No, that's a very interesting story. So I had an extremely traumatic, anybody that knows me personally knows I had an extremely traumatic event happen about 10 years ago now. And it really did impact my adult life and even things that I do day to day. So when I was about 24, I woke up and my boyfriend at the time had attempted suicide and he had locked the door, and I was the one that found him. And we lived so far up in the mountains in the Aspen area that that the EMTs could not even get a GPS location on us. So first, I cannot even get into the room because it actually wasn't locked. He had pushed a piece of furniture up against it. So I could crack the door and could see there was blood, and he was barely conscious, so I knew he was alive. So the first thing I did is I ran to, we kind of had a commune up there. We had several houses on that property, and we had a big house up there. And in the big house, 2 EMT/ski patrols lived. So I went and grabbed them, and luckily he had his his bag that they carry around with fluids and IVs and everything. And he was able to take an axe and knock the door down. And he went in and started life-saving measures on my boyfriend at the time, and was able to put him in a spinal C cuff and able to run fluids to him while we waited, because another roommate of mine had to actually drive down and meet EMS at a, crossroads and lead them back up to the house. Well, I'm on the phone with 911, and this is what really gets me, because looking back on it, I know when I was on the phone with 911, this must have been my call. Like, 911, what's your emergency? No, I went, my boyfriend has shot himself. Wow. And they're like, what? I mean, I was like, we talk a lot about flight, fight, or freeze, and I was frozen. I could not wrap my head around that, was he going to survive? Were they even going to get him to the hospital? I couldn't assess how badly he was injured. And my roommate that had gotten into the room wouldn't let anyone else in there, because I'm sure he thought, if he dies, this could be a crime scene, but if he dies, I don't want it to become a more chaotic scene.
I immediately called a friend to drive with us. We went to Denver, and
at the hospital there.
Met the whole family. Everybody had come in for his surgery, and they were unable to remove all of the bullet. And he got the best care I've ever seen at Craig Hospital outside of Denver. Got to go home. They tried to go back to school. And then ultimately, about 2 years later, he had a brain bleed and died. The only good thing about the story is that he was able to donate organs, and we know that some of those people are still alive. So that's the good news about it.
Well, and his family has received a letter from the person that got his heart. So his heart is still beating on this earth, which I just find super fascinating. But that, like I said, that was about 10 years ago, a very traumatic event. It changed me. I mean, I don't leave mad. I value life in such a different, I see life in such a different light now. It affected me, and like I said, it was definitely a huge learning lesson. Yes, he had started to have a brain bleed when he got to the hospital. It was declared he was not dead. He was unconscious. They flight for lifed him back to Denver, and at that time they did a coma assessment, and he had lost basically all brain function. And if he continued to live, he would never walk, talk, eat, or anything again. He'd be on tubes, for the rest of his life in a living facility. And we had talked about it as a family. We knew he did not want that. And so at that time, his family, and they asked, for my opinion, and I gave it, was to donate his organs. I thought that was, like Joan said, the best thing that could possibly come out of such a bad situation. But I remember the last time I put my hand over his heart and I said, I love you. I know you're going on, but this heart will continue to beat, and you will still be alive somewhere, somehow on this planet. And that's what got me kind of through that tragedy. But yeah, it's impacted my life. It's impacted my marriage, the way that me and my husband communicate, the way that, we don't leave each other mad. But I can relate heavily to, and I wasn't taken into surgery. I was not attacked. I was not part of the actual scene itself. So I can't imagine what must have gone through Darlie's head. And I'm sure in the first part of it, we know that the stages of grief are denial. And so they know the boys are dead before they go to the hospital, but does she really understand that? You don't process it like we say, you're looking in almost like through a snow globe. Like, did this happen to somebody else? Were they really my boys? Did somebody come spend the night at our house and maybe they, all these different things run through your mind because I've been there in a somewhat similar situation. So I just want to say that amnesia is a real thing. If you've never experienced trauma, that's amazing. And for those of you that have, if you'd like to share your story and you'd like for us to read it or post it on TikTok, we'd like to hear that because I think it's important for us to bring up these issues. We've talked about mental health, we've talked about suicide a lot through these Darlie episodes. And, this is a story that I actually really do not share. So there it is, it's shared. All right. Well, ending on that, do you have anything to say, Johnson, before we go into our next conspiracy theory?
No, just I have a very similar response when something like huge happens or traumatic. I'm very, very like calm and disconnected.
Yeah, and I
Which is
recognize
very,
that in you.
yeah, and it's so odd because like if the smallest inconvenience happens to me in everyday life, I will cry. But like my best friend very suddenly died when I was 18, and it was like I had like no reaction, and I felt so guilty about it for a long time. And it's just one of those weird things. Like I just don't react that way about big things. So yeah, I mean, I just relate to all the people on like 911 calls that don't seem
Oh my gosh. Well, and I
insane.
hate to evaluate 911 calls and what does grieving look like? And people on TikTok have been like, "Well, why didn't Darlie act appropriate during the funeral or the services?" And I'm like, what is appropriate, first of all? And now you're asking her to act, to be an actor on a stage?
Yeah, and I mean, especially in court, like they very specifically tell you you are not allowed to react to anything.
Right. And, I do think that it was, and I know Mulder tried to talk her out of it multiple times, but Darlie insisted on clearing her name and that she was not the killer of Devin and Damon. And so she did take the stand, but I ultimately do not think that it worked out well in her favor. And that's normally why, lawyers advise defendants to not take the stand because their character assassinated.
Well, yeah, and then the jurors just inevitably end up judging their story based on like, do I like them or not, or how are they acting instead of the facts, which is never helpful.
Well, and we know that there was a lot of people that said, there's one juror member name, is her name Carrie something? We might talk about her later, but she literally is like, I don't like Darlie because she has big boobs and she don't take her children to church. Come on, lady. Like that's And then I've heard other people say, look at that. We've seen the crime scene photos and we will not be posting those. If you want to find those, you can find resources. There's a book by Chris Brown that some of the pictures are in. If you want to go see them, I would advise not looking at them. The crime scene is so horrific, and I understand why people say somebody has to be held accountable for this. But just because there's a horrific crime scene does not mean that Darlie's the one that did it. I just think that's an interesting angle. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very common where jurors see, horrific crime scene photos and they're like, we gotta
blame someone.
Yeah, like we want justice to be served, and if this lady's on the stand or the cops caught them, then there's a reason.
Right.
Yeah.
All right, we're going to go into that was a good discussion. Thank you guys both for sharing your stories. We're going to go into the next conspiracy theory, and that is, did the husband do it? I'm going to pass it back over to Jones.
So there are reports a couple of weeks after the crime, a pair of Darren's jeans were found in the laundry room in the middle of a stack of folded clothes. And they had blood stains on the legs, and hook your thumbs into your pockets. And, I don't know what that means. Where are the original jeans that Darren took off at the hospital and James Patterson processed? Does it support the story? And there are some rumors out there that Darren actually went back upstairs to change his jeans after he had administered life-saving measures to Devon. And Devon was pumping out blood faster than Darren could do anything about it. So now, what does that mean? Where did those jeans go if they're full of blood? And so he puts on a pair of jeans, he goes back downstairs, and then he gets more blood on those jeans. Were those the ones that Patterson has that came off of Darren in the hospital? Or where did all that happen? And who knows if it's true or not true? The other rumor is that Darren went back upstairs to dispose of some drugs that he was using, maybe slash selling, maybe slash distributing. Darlie had a tox screen at the hospital. It was absolutely normal. It did show a little bit of the fen-phen that she had been taking, which we knew was going to show up. They never pulled anything, any kind of blood from Darren until it was time to do DNA. The stories circulate that they did a rape kit on Darlie. They did a partial rape kit on Darlie at the time she came into the ER. After she'd been in the hospital for a few hours, she was given a full OB-GYN exam that showed no trauma to the vaginal area and no STDs. Her hair wasn't processed as far as we know. None of her nails were clipped. We don't know. Her T-shirt's taken off in the... Sully just informed me that nail clippings were taken from Darlie. I don't have any DNA records on those nail scrapings.
And it's like, where did those scrapings go? Because we've heard that they did. And that's why we're trying to acquire some of her medical records. Where did those nail scrapings come? And if she had skin under her nails, then who was she scratching? Because there certainly were not nail scratch marks on the boys at autopsy.
Yeah, and they ultimately, 10 years after the trial, because they also didn't take the boys' fingerprints, did a quick exhumation of the boys and were able to lift some partial fingerprints. They weren't great because, of course, they were exhumed. So just a lot of things happened that were not per crime scene protocol. And again, I'm going to tell you that at that time, all that's going on, James Cron had not delivered his expert opinion of Darlie had to have done it. So has Darren been excluded 100%? The family does not believe that Darren was ever involved.
Okay, so another quick correction that was made by the family that they wanted to let us know, because I think it is pretty important, is we had said that they played Gangster's Paradise out during the Sully string party. That's not true. So Darren is the one that picked the funeral songs, and we've stated that Gangster's Paradise is one of the kids' favorite songs, and they always dance to it. And like I said, I'm, almost the same age as Devin, and I remember that song coming out, and we got down to that song. So they played that, I think, as the ending to the funeral, which, a lot of people kind of play more fun songs. As working in a funeral home for so long, a lot of people play Free as a Bird Now. Songs like that. I've heard Rob Zombie, Dragula, at funerals. So you guys are just, picking apart semantics. Also, any of the toys that were donated to Devin's birthday or to the family that were placed around the fountain, Danelle has confirmed they were all taken and donated to a local children's home. Of course, the boys had been excited to spray silly string at Dana's wedding. So, of course, Darlie and Dana sprayed it after the memorial. And, I have to wonder... Dana is the one that smoked cigarettes out the window, and Dana's the one that brought silly string to the party. And I think that, talking about trauma, I think Dana feels, she was young at the time, and I think she feels guilty about some of this. And I can see why. There's been rumors of Dana and Darren having an affair. I don't believe any of that is actually true. I just think that Dana feels probably very guilty about maybe some of the decisions. And again, she was young and she was just trying to support her sister. Other corrections. No one in the family.
Sorry. So there are two Danas. One is Darlie's younger sister. She was 14 or something at the time?
16. And I don't know.
16.
who
then
she was getting married to at 16, but
she
Darlie
wasn't. That was Darren's brother,
Oh, okay.
Beyonce, who's also
Named
Dana.
Dana. Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. So
I'm not sure which of those was smoking cigarettes because I thought that was the babysitter.
So if anyone and of course, remember, everyone is smoking in the 90s, including, younger kids. I mean, even in the UK, you can buy cigarettes at 14 or something. So, smoking used to be much more common. We've talked about this as well. But the babysitter and a few of Darlie's friends that did smoke cigarettes. But that day, her sister Dana, who was 16, I think was smoking a cigarette out the back window, in the garage, because that's where everybody smoked. And she is supposedly the one that forgot to close the window. But we've also heard that Darren's the one that opened the window when he was working in the garage. So I don't know. It's no one's fault. I mean, accidentally leaving a window cracked is not an invitation for somebody to come into your home. So, Dana, I just want to state, just because maybe you made some decisions does not mean that you had, anything to do with this. And Dana and Danelle are both very amazing, great supporters of Darlie and have raised amazing families. So, did that answer your question? Yes, you're right. So Dana's brother-in-law, Darren's brother, Dion, also married a woman by the name of Dana. Now, they've been divorced since, but you're right. Because me and Mom were talking about this last night when we were reviewing the script. We're like, she was 16 and getting married. So thank you for that correction, Johnson. You're correct.
I mean, it could have been her at 16. It is Texas in the 90s.
Well, and Darlie got married.
I assume it was Dion's. Yeah.
I'm pretty sure you're right. But, Darlie got engaged at 17 and married at 18 or 19. But anyways, you're right. I'm pretty sure it was Darren's brother, Dion's wife, Dana. Because there's not enough D names in this story already. So another thing, we talked about when we talked quite a bit about Judge Tully, that why didn't the family pay the bail? Why didn't Darren sell a boat, sell a car, even sell the house to pay to bail Darlie out? Well, originally when she was incarcerated, they had set a bail for her, and we're not 100% sure on this, but we think it was $500,000, which means that if you do the 10% bond, it's going to be $50,000. So the family had the $50,000, and when they went to the bail or the bond hearing, Tully revoked that and said, you cannot bail her out. She needs to remain in prison. And we've talked about her habeas corpus rights, and she has no criminal history. She has no flight record, and they had not gathered or gotten any testing back that proved Cron's theory that she was guilty. So why did Tully revoke her bail? Well, Tully was not playing ball with Parks and Huff, the state investigators that were originally put on Darlie's case, and they were not allowing them, he was shutting down testing, shutting down the bond or the bail. He was just not playing ball with them. And so that is when the family decided, let's hire Mad Dog Mulder, and maybe Mad Dog can really get his claws into Tully. And they had known each other and worked with each other in the Texas legal system for a long time. So the family thought Mulder's going to be able, Tully's going to play ball with Mulder. Well, I don't really know if that worked out either, because Tully certainly, I don't think, played fair. And I did have somebody ask me on TikTok, we stated this before, there was a West Texas judge, and I cannot find his name, that did state, okay, so it's out of Kathy Cruz's book, that a West Texas judge, we believe out of Lubbock, said, if that had been in my courtroom, I would have thrown the case out at that point. So then Darlie did agree and knew that her defense was being changed to Mulder because of this. And because the state was coming after the family, that is why they put in the contract that if he was going to represent Darlie, that they didn't want to put, because Darren was suspect number 2. He had blood all over him, and most of the time it's somebody in the house. Well, Darlie certainly had more life insurance at the time than the boys did. Her life insurance policy was much higher. So why wouldn't have Darren killed Darlie and killed the 2 boys, but yet he left Darlie with the highest life insurance and the baby, who would have been the most work, alive. You know what I mean? So I just think that Judge Toll does not like Darlie. Now, because Johnson is our polygraph expert, she is going to get into polygraphs. And Brian Pardo was an investigator on this case, and I will let her take it away.
He was not an investigator on this case. He was actually a wealthy Waco businessman who Darren talked to, and I'll let the rest of the story proceed.
Oh, I don't know that much about Brian Pardo.
He was
so
not
can
an
you fill us
investigator. He was just a wealthy man
that wanted to support
that took an
cause.
interest in the case.
Okay.
I have no idea what Brian Pardo has to do with the polygraphs.
Brian Pardo paid for Darren and Darlie to take polygraph tests. So Darren took a polygraph and failed miserably. And Darlie took one after the arrest, and it came back inconclusive. So what are your thoughts on that?
Why would you have to pay to get a polygraph when police ask you to do it, or the court does and they pay for it?
Because they wanted it sealed and shut. If somebody failed, the family, I guess, didn't want those results getting back into which I know polygraphs aren't allowed in the courtroom, but getting back to the investigators.
So what would be the point of taking them if a positive polygraph result generally isn't admissible in court?
I think they wanted to say, they're innocent. And then Darren fails.
And Darlie's is inconclusive.
Yeah. Yeah, and Darren has excuses. He said he was nervous. He had never taken a polygraph before. But, we've talked about Darren, and I know the family doesn't think he was involved.
If you guys listen to our polygraph episode, you'll remember that they aren't science, and the results really don't mean anything because, half of the positives are wrong and half of the you faileds are wrong. So who knows?
And who even administered this?
Yeah,
if it's not through the police, yeah,
or anything like that. And yeah, it really doesn't mean anything.
Yeah, I just think it's a moot point, to be honest. So let's go on to Someone Knows Something. In one of our last episodes, we talked about Arkansas. Do you remember Arkansas and what was his name? Axl Rose. Yeah, Tim Harris is Arkansas. And he's the one that gets into the brawl in the jail yard, the jail yard, where the name Darlene, or something gets overheard about two boys. And we talked about this in a previous episode. So since then, we have dug in, and we learned that he died 6 months after the Routier murders, after he gets into the jail yard, fight. He did suffer from mental illness and was a known drug user, but he committed suicide in his cell. However, his death is believed to be a murder. And so, because he is dead and we cannot get DNA from him, someone reached out to his brother, who lives somewhere in the tri-state area, I want to say, maybe New Mexico, Oklahoma, Colorado, something like that. And he has submitted his DNA to test against DNA at the Routier scene. Those results currently are being looked at by the Innocence Project, who has taken Darlie's case on. And so I guess we'll see. But it is good to know that we have a upstanding citizen out there that willingly donated DNA to this cause. So, going on about Arkansas, and some of the stories that Arkansas tells is that there were drugs and people selling drugs running all around Rowlett. Now, that's an interesting story because living in the area at the time, I can say that our high school in our little town, the cartel must have come in and really hit Dallas hard during the early 90s, 2000 era. A high school, Plano High School, that was a neighboring high school of mine, was known as Heroin High. Their city of Dallas had been infiltrated with cartels, drug use, and Dallas was one of the most dangerous cities in the 90s. So is it far-fetched that there is a group of con men that are running drugs in the Rowlett area? I don't know. Let's talk about it. So I believe in our last episode, Darlie had outed Glenn Mice having an affair with Baja, or Barbara Jovel. And Darlie went to Glenn Mice's wife and said, I know you are having an affair with Baja. And subsequently, it's very ironic that Glenn Mice's stepdaughter, whose name is Allison Hennessy, and we've talked about her, she testifies in the conviction phase of Darlie's trial. And she has not great things to say about Darlie, but in her home, all she's hearing is negative things about Darlie because Darlie outed the affair. And so both Allison's mom and her stepdad were PO'd at Darlie for exposing this. So Barb was also known, and I've ran her record. She has a record of in and out of jail for a long time now. She actually has pretty serious offenses, and a lot of them go back to drug charges. So it seems like her drug of choice was benzos. That would be, again, like a Xanax, Klonopin, Ativan, lorazepam, things like that. Barbara actually went to county jail while Darlie is awaiting trial in Dallas County Jail. And Darlie catches wind that Barb's in jail with her in county. And basically the story is that Darlie kind of went to Barb and said, look, I have given you money. I've paid for trips. I have employed you after no one else would employ you because of your background and because of your psychiatric record. My family has done so much for me. And there had been a rumor that Barb was going to testify against Darlie. So Darlie basically said, if you end up testifying against me, you're a rat. You're going to tear my family apart just to save tail. So I can actually see Barb's charges at that time were dropped. And again, it's been rumored that the police spent quite a bit of time over at Barbara Jovel's house. So was Barb testifying to get back at Darlie? Because we've always wondered, why would your best friend testify against you? Even if you'd had a falling out, even if you guys weren't still best friends. I mean, I don't truly believe Barb thought that Darlie had killed her children. I don't think she thought that. Speaking off of, to wrap this up, Allison Hennessy's testimony was in direct conflict with a woman by the name of Renee, and she was another girl that loved Darlie in the neighborhood that kind of hung out and helped babysit around the Routier home. And she had just been early pregnant when the crime was committed and had just had a baby when Darlie goes to trial. And so because of that, she was not able to make it to the trial, but she was supposed to testify as a character witness to Darlie. And she states to this day that she fully regrets that she was not able to testify for Darlie because she feels like she could have basically would have conflicted Allison Hennessy's testimony. Again, this is the things I've heard through the rumor mill on Reddit. Again, remember, this is our conspiracy episode, okay? And what about the past presidents? Legal outliers, much like the mysterious black car spotted in the neighborhood before June 6, are there mere coincidences or could they hold the key to unraveling the truth? Did the black car in front of the Routier home after the crime have any relevance? And did the neighborhood sightings of black cars prior to June 6 have any relevance? Barbara's mother, Helena, says that she saw the black car idling in the alley outside of the Routier's garage just the prior afternoon to the murder, or the same afternoon as the murder. Were both the prosecutors and defense lazy, biased, or indifferent to the lives they touched? Her defense argues Brady violations, which means that there would be undisclosed evidence that could have altered the course of the trial. Was there a deliberate attempt to obscure exculpatory information? And I have a question for you, Johnson. So after they've done the discovery hearing and Parks and Huff are on this case, they've pulled what they want out of discovery, per se. You know, if anything wasn't hidden, which we believe that there could be exculpatory evidence, but we have no proof of that. Let's say Parks and Huff are the ones that went through and pulled what they wanted out of discovery. when Mulder gets on the case, he's not allowed to reopen discovery and go through it himself, is he?
I believe that whatever Parks and Huff had, they would have turned over to Mulder, and then
Mulder didn't accept
additional
it.
requests if he would like. Well, he had to have, otherwise he wouldn't know anything. I don't know how
So
thoroughly
he
went
might
through
have
it.
used like Parks and Huff's original investigation, what they pulled from Discovery, but he didn't use the forensic investigation that Epstein and Labor had conducted.
So Discovery, I think what you're referring to, so most of it is what the prosecution has,
Right.
their investigation, and they
What
turn
the
over.
state has gathered that would be evidence toward putting a defendant away, right? And
Yes.
then the objective of the defense is to poke holes in any of that state's evidence.
Yeah. And then the defense has to turn over, it's gray. They usually turn over what they have unless it would like directly affect their ability to argue with a case.
Okay.
So like they may have to say, we have this witness coming in, but they might not have to disclose what that witness
was going to
testified.
say. Sure. But these are the
So Mulder should have had access to Parks and Labor and Epstein's like work and stuff.
He just decided not to use it for whatever reason. And I wonder what
That-
I've been looking, and if anyone has it, I've been looking. Does Epstein and Labor's like work still exist? Are there any documents out there? Were they sealed? Were they trashed because they really served no value? I just wonder, is Labor and Epstein even still alive? You know, we really haven't dug into them too much, but if anybody has any information on that, I'd be super interested to know. Another
it could
thing,
have been a money issue as well. Like say Parks and Huff paid Labor and Epstein to do the investigation, but
they
when it
did.
was switched to Mulder, there was no money left to pay them to be like, okay, write up the reports and give me a briefing and stuff
and then
like
you're
that.
going to have to come testify in court, and you're going to have to pay for a hotel.
Which you have to pay for that stuff too, yeah.
Exactly.
So
Okay.
it could have been that.
And maybe there wasn't anything in Park. You know, maybe they hadn't been on the case long enough to really, like we said, we don't know what they found. And they've never came out, to my knowledge, and said, oh, by the way, we cracked the Darlie case, because I feel like everything comes out in the wash. It's been 30 years later. I feel like something might have been said if they knew this major piece of evidence existed. Do you think?
I would guess, yeah. And it could have also been like Mulder thought, well, I can prove that without this stuff or something like that.
Right, exactly. Yeah. And
Like they
without
may
having
not
to
have
spend
found
any money.
anything.
Yeah. Okay.
Mind blowing.
Well, and another correction is we did not know if the jury had seen the autopsy photos. They were seeing the autopsy photos. Now, I don't know if they were shown the crime scene photos, but I know the autopsy photos were shown during deliberation. But why was Tully so mean? Was it just that good old Texas boy mentality? And was Judge Tully unfit to judge this case? That's up for you guys to decide. Some of the things that happened in this case that we think the defense through, and we're going to go through what the defense threw and what the prosecution threw real quick. So, incompetence galore. The first problem, talked about several problems that Mulder's had in this case, but Darlie's bruises were not shown in the courtroom. And that was one of the things that really made me switch my mind, because I think I've told you guys, and I've stated it on TikTok, and I've told the family this, I originally thought Darlie was guilty. And when we thought about doing this case, I said, why? There's really nothing to report. I mean, it's a slam dunk. She's guilty. And it was when I started putting the timeline together and trying to figure out how the bruising to that extent got on her arms. And so when you don't have a motive, you can't put together a timeline, and you can't account for how somebody would receive some of the wounds that were supposedly self-inflicted from a non-dominant hand from this little tiny woman. And I just want to remind you guys that Darlie's about 5'2" and weighs about 120 pounds. Now, after she had Drake, she hadn't quite lost all that weight, but she was a tiny woman. And when you see pictures of her and videos of her online, I don't think people realize how tiny she really is. So when I could not piece those together is what really made me think, got to dig deeper into this, and there's something wrong here. And that's when my mind truly began to change. So when people say, right out the gate, no, I totally took this case on from a non-biased view. I already thought Darlie was guilty, but I needed to play it out for myself. That's where the story falls through. And to this day, not one non-supporter that's been on TikTok has been able to provide me with a timeline that works itself out. So let's get into some of the blood pattern analysis. And I've done several videos of this, and I'm currently doing a series on Tom Bevel. So I'm going to have Johnson present this information to you.
So a lot of people look at the photos of the sink and the luminol reaction and think, oh my gosh, it's lit up like a Christmas tree. The photo that most people see and tout on websites and things is not the photo of the crime scene. It has nothing to do with Darlie's case. That's a different sink. So if you read the testimony, where the luminol hit on the kitchen sink was a little bit on the faucet, a tiny bit on the backsplash. And when I say tiny bit, I mean like 3 droplets, and then a tiny bit around the drain, like on the stainless steel part. So there were photos taken of this luminol reaction, but I can't really discern whether or not the jury was showing them.
I've never seen them. Have you? These
No.
photos of the luminol? No, I haven't either.
I just know that in the testimony, when they describe the luminol reaction, it is very minimal.
And why? And so why didn't they show it?
For, kind of by her story, rinsing out the rags and stuff, because there's no signs of a cleanup, despite what some people are saying. That's not in the testimony. There are no white marks or anything like that. There are only signs of like water hitting and displaying it, but no wiping action.
If you go look at the crime scene photos, a lot of people say you can only see her footprints leading to the sink. That's not true. You can see her footprints leading to and from the sink, and this was another photo that I wanted to make sure that I posted. Along with the fact that when I did my experiment, you can see in the photos where some blood is diluted and some blood looks like blood, but some blood does look diluted. And I think that's from her carrying the rags and wringing them out in the sink. Also, the prosecution completely took the house apart, and they took all the plumbing and everything apart, and none of that was put in the testimony. So they obviously didn't find anything. And people have said, oh, Darlie's panties, and we're going to hit on this at the end of the episode, her panties are missing. Did she flush them down the toilet? Did Darren flush drugs down the toilet? And do you think if these things had all been flushed down the toilet and they took all the plumbing apart before anybody else was in the house running plumbing or showering, and everyone's kicked out and it's a crime scene, don't you think they would have found those panties and drugs in those traps, Another thing I want to touch on, sorry, I'm just hijacking this to get through it. Another prosecution theories is that the wine rack was hit by, that Darlie threw the wine glass to stage the scene. Well, first of all, there's no cast off from her arm wound where she would have thrown the glass, because we knew that she was bleeding before that glass was thrown, because it's one of the last things that happens. And Darren actually testifies that he can hear the glass. So I was listening to Rich's podcast last week, and on his podcast, they were looking specifically at these crime scene photos of her walking back and forth to the sink, talking about the sink luminol, basically stating what we're stating. And if you look at the crime scene photos, which I know that a lot of people had been in and out of that house, but there is a story that Darlie states that there was a rug in front of that wine rack and that the kids had kept tripping on it. And in her mind, mentally, she's like, oh, I need to move that rug. Well, there's a theory, and it makes sense if you go, and this again, these are some photos I want to post. If you go look, we had stated maybe the wine glass had been on the counter and got knocked off, or, whatever. It actually looks like the perp tripped on that rug and accidentally slammed into the wine rack, and the glass globe broke off the stem in the rack, because the way the glass is sitting, we can see pieces of glass on top of the ice bucket like that you find in a hotel, and you can see glass up on that countertop where the wine glass was, or the wine rack, the baker's rack. So
also, Obviously, we're not sure if it was like this before when the crime happened, or if someone touched it before the photo was taken. But in the photo of the wine rack, you can see one of the bottles of wine leaning over.
Right.
And where the top of the wine bottle there's like a space where a wine glass would be, but it's not. So it might have, if someone knocked into it for whatever reason, the wine bottle may have hit the globe of the wine glass and shattered it.
Yeah. And then the stem fell out after, it fell. But clearly the glass fell from above the wine rack, not from below. So did she throw it at the wine rack? Because again, that would have shown cast off from her arm. So I throw the whole wine, though. Again, the wine glass becomes a moot point. In my experiments, one of the ways, and I posted this on my TikTok, she has scratches on one of her arms. If the killer was wearing a wristwatch, they match up almost perfectly. And we'll post those photos on our social media because I have them like in a layout to where they're right next to each other. And I have told the family, you might want to check, if there is a suspect the IP is looking at, do they have a wristwatch that contains Darlie's DNA somewhere in it? Does that person still have that watch? It's always possible. But you can kind of see these, what look like almost box or line shape, kind of U-shaped, L-shaped markings. And it's identical to links on a watch. There's also a theory from the PI that just her being stabbed in the arm would have thrown her arm back against the sofa, and it could have just been from her. I mean, that knife wound could have also possibly contributed to some of the bad bruising on her right arm, because getting stabbed with a knife and it nicked the bone, which again, we're trying to pull her medical records and what parts of those the family wants us to talk about and they feel is appropriate, we will. So, do you even want to go into if a second knife was used, the knives?
I do, because I have talked to Mystery Maverick about this.
Okay.
And I would love to share what she had to say.
Let me interject my one thing that I found out during my experiments before you go into Mystery Maverick, because she is a wealth of information and she's very smart and she does something in forensics. So, in my experiment, one of the things about the two knife theory, and I'll show you this in the cow heart, is we go back to lines of Langer. If you are cut with the muscle as opposed to against the muscle, it's going to leave different gaping. And even some of the stab marks in my cow hearts look like they're gaping open about an inch, which is consistent with some of the autopsy photos. And some of them look like just a straight line that you almost can't see. And it just depends on what kind of fat is there, what kind of tissue is there. And of course, the boys would have been, their rib cages anatomically would not have been as like calcified or as hard as an adult's, because in a growing body, those bones and ribs don't fuse until later adolescence, early 20s. Your rib cage actually doesn't even completely fuse together until that point, because your organs and your heart are still growing. And so I don't know how hard it would have been to penetrate through the chest of those boys. In my opinion, it wouldn't have been very hard, but in some of the forensic people we've talked about, which I kind of trust them over me, it would have been pretty hard to penetrate the cartilage the way that it was penetrated. And let's go back and think that Darlie is this tiny little woman, and she's supposed to be running around, slitting screens, running socks down the street, staging crime scenes, throwing things over, moving a glass table. I mean, when I did all these things in the best timeline that you can get, which when we get into the BPA and Bevel and the teeth that they had to pull to get out of him, that Darlie was most likely one of the first bleeders. I mean, you can't make it fit. So why don't you go ahead and tell us what Mystery Maverick and you have talked about? Because I've not heard this. I'm excited.
Yeah, so there are theories and stuff out there that there were two different knives used. And the reason for this is, number one, MEs cannot tell you what kind of weapon was used in the crime. They can only say, could have been this, most likely not this, things like that. Like, could be, might be. but they can't look at a wound and tell you that, this was a ninja star or something like that. So the Emmy said she brought up the possibility of a different weapon because with most of Devon's wounds, the wounds were such that they could not tell if a single or double-edged knife was used. And Devon's blood, as far as we know, was not found on the butcher knife. And then also a couple of Damon's wounds were smaller than his others. And so they thought, maybe possibly this could be from a different weapon. But none of this is to say the Emmy was not like, I think there was a different weapon. All they're saying is we can't tell, and it could be.
It's probable, or it's possible, but not probable. They that's the way they speak.
That. Yeah, they're just like, yeah, it could be.
It could, or it could not. So again, I feel like it becomes a moot point.
Yeah. So could there be two different weapons? Possibly. We just don't know. It's based off of some wounds are smaller than others for whatever reason, and most of Devon's were such that they can't tell what kind of edge the knife had.
Well, and if Devon was attacked first, by the time the stabber gets to Damon and they fought Darlie, they might have been tired. So Damon's wounds might not have gone in as sharply and as forcefully as Devon's.
Maybe, or, the blood was so mixed that they only took samples of what they could separate into profiles, and maybe Devon's blood was on there and they just couldn't.
Well, and they've only, like the first time they tested the knife, they only tested it in 4 places. Now they tested it several more places when we get into our DNA episode. But me and Jones were talking last night when we were preparing the script. And, one of our theories that we've talked about is what if the perp or the unsub, when he cut the window, had, a pocket knife on him and then grabbed the knife from the Routier kitchen. And then, if there is 2 knives or 2 killers, either way you look at it, what if one uses a pocket knife and one uses the knife from the Routier home? What if one perp, because there is blood found in the garage, we have corroborated this with Rich and with Mystery Maverick, there was blood found in the garage. So the killer did leave blood as he was leaving. But I come back to the point, if Darlie's blood had been in the garage, then that gives people that support her guilt, well, then she ran the sock down the street because there's a blood trail. You know what I mean? So they pick and choose what kind of evidence they want to look at. And if there would have been blood out to the alley or, Darlie's blood on the sock, they say, well, then that would have proved that she was bleeding before the sock was placed. But then if there would have been blood on the sock, they said, well, then she planted it. And so they say because there is no blood of Darlie's on the sock, then she must have planted it before she hurt herself, but after the boys had been stabbed. But we're about to get in why that's not true. So why don't you go ahead?
They also say that the perp couldn't have gone out the window because there was no blood on the window screen. But there was blood in the garage. But if Darlie left her blood in there when she went to cut the screen, then why isn't there blood on the screen if you're using the same logic?
Right. And I'm pretty sure that the blood is right outside.
Run the sock, come back in, hurt yourself over the sink, on the couch, and then go into the garage, cut the screen, come back. But there's no footprints in the garage. It's only drops. Like it.
And the drop is like one low velocity, so a perfect circle right out of the garage door. So not where they found the Kool-Aid. That is believed to have been some kind of, Kool-Aid popsicle thing. But the blood drop that's right outside of the door that Long collects, because Cron says, don't collect that. And Lynch either tells Catherine Long, the serologist, to collect it, or Catherine Long didn't get the message and collected it anyway. And it makes its way into the evidence. But it's, again, reported that Cron told Long not to collect that evidence because then they start finding evidence that goes against his theory. Okay, so why don't you go ahead and tell us, do you think Bevel is qualified as a BPA, as a blood pattern analyst?
Sort of, kind of. It's hard to tell because it's possible to find the standards from 96 of what was considered qualified. But in today's world, he'd be almost qualified. So I think he probably was. He did have his degrees. He did many courses. He did an academy.
I mean, he taught
He went
courses.
to seminars. He taught courses. So he had like, I think something around 140 hours of training. And then that's not even including his experience on cases.
Yeah, like
so I
in the
think for the
field.
90s, that's pretty good.
Well, and at that time, we thought this was groundbreaking science, just like DNA.
I'm not sure.
I mean, I think the general public thought that. I don't know how the forensics field thought about it in the beginning, because there was only one school that taught it.
I think back then, if anyone was called an expert by the court, the public believed whatever they said. Yeah.
Well, and I looked it up, and to be considered an expert, you just have to know more than the jury. I'm like,
we are experts.
That's what I said. I'm like, then I'm an expert.
Legally.
So let's talk about what no one wants to talk about. So when I did mine. Huh?
Well, I don't want to talk about it.
Okay, then let's not. Let's just end the episode. No, we're almost done. Let's get it done.
About the demonstrations you did.
Yeah, so one of the things that is stated, and we're going to go over this in the DNA report, is that Devin and Darlie's blood is mixed together, which means they were attacked around the same time. Now, it is believed that Darlie was attacked first because some of her blood is underneath Devin's. But Bevel, I mean, like I said, Mulder has to pull teeth. They go through Dalbert. They go through Fry. They objected. They rule a 702. And I talk about this on TikTok. They go through all of that to try and just, get Bevel off the stand. They take the jury in. They take the jury out. And so Mulder finally gets Bevel to admit that Darlie was bleeding at the same time Devin was. Otherwise, it would not have been considered a mixed blood. So that automatically throws the timeline, and that Darlie had to run the sock down the alley after the boys were killed. That throws that whole timeline out the window. I also did an experiment where I used the cow hearts as a stand-in for the crime scene for the boys. And I know this is really hard for some people. And some people said that it was inappropriate. And I just want to let you know, I had asked the family if I could do this before I did it. And they wanted me to. So I got the heart and I got blood and I pumped syringes and I looked at how much blood circulates in a small boy's body. And if Darlie had been attacked, then her blood pressure and her blood rate would have probably been higher. So she's probably pumping blood more quickly. So A is that Darlie was probably attacked first, or either Darlie or Devin, but they were attacked simultaneously or right after each other, Also, no matter how many times I stabbed the hearts and pulled the knife as far back over my head, I finally, and I'm not even joking, I quit counting at 50 and continued to go on. So let's say guesstimate around 100 after I had butchered the heart and blood was all over the room and all over the place. Could I finally get one drop of blood on the back of my shirt that looked like the one that Bevel pulled? Now, I was able to get the blood stain on the t-shirt in two separate ways. We've already talked about this. Whoever worked on Devin then went on to work on Darlie. Could there have been contamination? When he popped his gloves off, could it have made that blood spatter? Another one is that somebody had asked me to do this experiment on TikTok, and was that when Darlie, and they both testified to this, leaned over Devin to hold his chest closed while Darren was trying to perform CPR, did her hair get caught up in some of his blood? Or when he was being attacked, did the blood from Devin's attack? Because when I did my attack, all of the blood splatter, if you wield the knife totally up over your head, goes about 24 inches or 2 feet behind you. So it's not landing directly. I mean, just think about an arc. It's not going to land directly on your back. If the knife is 18 inches in front of you, then it's going to land about 18 inches behind you. So When Devon was being attacked, did some of that blood splatter land on Darlie's shoulder since she was laying on her left side, as we've said? So I can poke holes in this. Oh, I was saying, so when she bent over to give Devon CPR, did Devon's blood get in her hair, and did her hair leave that mark? Well, that mark matches almost identically to the one that Bevel pulls, and I will post these pictures. So if Devon's blood got into Darlie's hair, and her hair actually, and I confirmed this with Danelle, was about the same length and style, layered like mine, her hair was maybe an inch or two longer than mine. But at any rate, both of our hair hits about the shoulder. Hers hit just below the shoulder. Our hair is about the same. I think that is a very, that's 3 different ways I could poke holes in the prosecution's theory. And this took me a day. Why didn't Mulder go get blood? Why didn't Lloyd Harrell go get blood if he was an FBI investigator and do a simple experiment and show this? And so this is going to cross our Dalbert versus Fry. So Fry was the first protocol that was put into place, and it was established in 1923 in the case Fry versus the United States. It was the earliest standard that basically just said there has to be some scientific backing if an expert's going to get on the stand and talk about anything in forensics. And of course, in the 1930s, forensics would have been fingerprinting. Maybe some trace if electron microscopes had not been invented by then. This would have been not the type of evidence we're used to looking at today. So that was replaced by the Dalbert standard. And Bevel admits that there was no written protocol for his experiment, and a written protocol is crucial in scientific experiments to ensure consistency, repeatability, and transparency. So the inconsistency in the execution of Bevel's experiments, Bevel mentions variations in how he performed the experiments, including differences in dropping heights, tapping motions, and the number of repetitions. He lack of consistency in experimental conditions that can compromise the reliability of the results. He has limited documentations. There were no detailed notes taken during the experiments, and documentation is essential for understanding the experimental processes, making it difficult for others to assess the validity of the results. He has reliance on visual observations. Bevel relied on his own observation without quantitative measurements, and scientific experiments often involve precise measurements to support the conclusions drawn. These were also the uncontrolled variables. Testability, peer review and publication, known error rate, existence and maintenance of standards, and the general acceptance of the field, which would have been BPA. So I feel like it comes down to, if the sock doesn't fit, you must acquit. You cannot make the sock fit. And another piece of major evidence that is missing is the panties. Where are they? We've heard that they were flushed down the toilet, that they were maybe thrown around where the sock was thrown, that Darlie threw them down the drain. Well, Frelette had opened that drain. They could have disproved that, first of all. But I just want to state, since there's scent dogs out there, if Darlie had thrown those panties anywhere, those scent dogs would have found them. So I truly believed that her panties are missing from her as a trophy. And Darlie's fate was sealed. So we're going to get into some more DNA, and we are going to then conclude with our own theories and observations and what we as individuals think about what happened in this case. Now, I just want to go on to say we've made corrections and we've gathered a lot more information. We started this case 3 years ago. The amount of information that we found through either the rumor mill, although like today, our episode's a little bit more rumory, more conspiracy. Everything we have tried to fact check, we've tried to find, we've talked to the family. I don't know how else we can reference this. We have really dug into this case, and Belubi, who gave us an amazing review, said no one else, there's not another podcast out there that's been able to put this story into such a chronological and understandable series of events. And that's what made me want to keep going, because this case can burn you out, man. It gets tiring. And I just think that the Routiers have been through this for almost 30 years. If Darlie is let free and walks, she gets about $2 million per year that she spent in prison. And I made sure that she does not have to pay taxes on that money.
Stay tuned for our next episode, part 9, where we go into more DNA, conspiracy theories, and talk about the appeals and what's been going on and where a case stands today.
Yeah, so in 2015, they did a massive DNA report that was sealed. And a lot of people think the family sealed that because it implicated Darlie, because a lot of the results came back to Darlie. As we know, I mean, Darlie was the bleeder. Mystery Maverick, she has her own podcast. And so if you go on YouTube, just as you can search Rich Prater, just look up, she's got her channel. They also did a case together, Rich and Mystery Maverick, on the Candace Hilt case. And it is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, Mystery Maverick has the best accent. It's amazing to listen to.
I love her.
She's so knowledgeable and
She
soothing
is.
and organized. She has a great podcast. You
And
guys should check it
she's spent time on the phone with us, consulting with us. And so she's taken time out of her day to help us get our story straight too. So
Yeah,
I thank
she's
her for
also
that.
my new best friend. Maverick, you're first.
We have met, despite, like I said, some of the harassment and stuff, we have met some of the best, most amazing people. And I truly believe that Darlie has a place in this world. And if she gets out and she gets that money, I think that she will. Darlie is a strong-minded, strong-willed woman who has been, miscarried by our justice system. I don't know how else to say it. Like, it's a huge miscarriage of justice, in my opinion. And I know that I've heard that she plans to put some initiatives in place and to try and change some of the laws if she does get out. So perfect. And then I think our finale will conclude with, I've invited some people that have been a part of this case, like Belubi and Mystery Maverick, and another one of my friends that's been on the back end helping me do some research. And she's followed this case and has known about this case from day one. And she's been a big support for me. She's been somebody I've been able to bounce ideas off of. And she's also very knowledgeable in the true crime field, just as a layman. But she might come on. And so our next one will be DNA. And then we'll kind of go into conclusions and what we think happened and any leads that were left and any
Bye.
signing off.
Thanks for letting us see your holes.
Happy New Year. I just want to state that we put out Darlie episode 1 on New Year's of last year. And if I thought we were still working on this dang case a year from now, but like I said, the people we've met, it's been such an amazing experience. And I think that this case was brought to us for a reason. It was requested by a fan. And I don't remember who requested that 2 or 3 years ago. But here you go. I hope you've gotten the information you wanted. Signing off.
Probably a bit too much.
They're like, oh, God, I created a monster.
What did I do?
All right. We just want our fans to stay safe out there. And I hope your holidays went well. And everyone have a happy new year. And stay tuned for KTR. And we'll wrap up Darlie, I hope, by the end of this month. And then we are going to take a few month hiatus to get ready for round 2, season 2. We'll see you then. Bye, guys.
Bye.